I want to welcome you to the Leading from Purpose podcast. My name is Nick Craig, and I'm going to be your host. My guest today is Willem Pruys. William comes from Australia and works there. And when I met him about 10 years ago, he was the CHRO for Bunnings. Now, you say, well, what is Bunnings? Well, down under, Bunnings is the Home Depot of Australia. And it's the biggest and most successful box retailer. And I've had the opportunity of working with Willem for probably 10 or more years. He's now advising the top team. He's not playing the CHRO role anymore, but doing that to Bunnings and a number of other companies and helping them be successful. Our focus for today are two things. One is we're going to get to have a conversation with Willem around his purpose and how it's had an impact for him personally. But just as important, we're going to talk about how do you translate purpose into real business impact, strategic leverage. And he is probably one of the experts on the planet for how to do that. So, Willem, thank you for being on this podcast.
Thanks for inviting me, Nick.
You're very welcome. So, first of all, what is your purpose?
My purpose is to create space for people to really fly.
Okay, so that's interesting. So now, what does that mean? What do the words mean, and where does that come from?
Little bit of background for me. I grew up across 3 continents. Went to 14 schools before I finished school, and the first chapter of all of that was in Africa, and most of it in South Africa. And so I grew up literally with wide open spaces. And the thing that I kind of look back on and remember most about my childhood is the freedom that gave me and the ability to explore and the sense of adventure, I guess, that gave me. In circumstances where it was anything but smooth. It sounds idyllic, but it wasn't that.
I'm sure.
My father was a really lovely guy. But pretty hopeless with money and pretty hopeless at keeping his mouth shut when he should have done so. And so the result of that, along with his misguided entrepreneurial streak, meant that we moved around a lot because he had to go and find the next gig. He had to go and find the next job. Few bankruptcies. Know what it's like to have the debt collector come to the door, all that kind of stuff. But kind of transcending all of that was this wide open spaces kind of thing. And was my sense, even when I was a little boy, was my sense that I could make it better. And so in some ways I was chief peacekeeper, if you like. So that's about convincing other people that there is space when they think there isn't. And in this case, that was specifically around my parents' relationship and everything that was going on. They had the opportunity to leave because we're from Dutch extraction, and they had the opportunity to leave when I was 12 years of age to go back to Europe because my mother's mother passed away, and they came into a little bit of money, just enough to get us out of South Africa at the time, at the height of apartheid and all that stuff.
Wow.
And so that made the decision that we better go back to Holland. And so that's what we did. And to say that we hated it would be an understatement of the year. And the reason we hated it is the whole open spaces thing again. It was, everyone lives on top of each other. Everyone knows everything about each other. It was, none of the family were terribly happy. And I look back on it now and I think, I don't know what caused this, but I was the one that put my hand up and kind of said, this isn't cool. Why are we here? We need to go somewhere else. Now, somewhere else was Australia. And so we were back there for 14 months in Holland. And then my parents made the decision that wide open spaces sounded like a good idea. And we got an assisted passage to Australia as the Australian government were doing at that time. And arrived here in Melbourne and lived in a migrant hostel for about 6 months.
Wow.
And so they did that to create opportunity for their kids, because they didn't want them to grow up in South Africa and didn't want them to grow up in Holland. So that's the space thing. The really fly thing is kind of related to that, because I remember very clearly that when we got back to Holland, couldn't speak the language, all that kind of stuff. As you know, most Europeans can speak a form of English, so you can make yourself understood and they can understand you. And I kept getting these questions about South Africa and about what it was like to live there, and specifically around the whole apartheid thing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And when you're a 12-year-old kid and that's how you've grown up, you don't know any better.
Right.
So I remember going home kind of saying, how come these people are asking me all this weird shit? It's like, you know, isn't that the way the world is? And so I learnt that that's not the way the world is. And I found myself kind of scratching my head saying, what is it that enables that to kind of happen? And then what is it that makes people come out the other side? And as I've grown up, that's kind of become a bit of a catalyst, because effectively creating space for people to really fly is about helping them see the space, but it's also about clearing the space for them. And it's about them, through that, finding the best version of themselves. And I've spent my whole life doing that, whether it's been the peacekeeper role or
Right.
I found myself doing other things. You know, I went to university with no great motivation about anything other than this dream that I'd be able to influence stuff and make things better. And went down the primary school teaching route and loved the teaching, but hated the bureaucracy, and actually found that was the enclosed thing, you know, not enough space.
Oh, that's the enclosed part of it. Oh, that's interesting.
That kind of stuff. So I had to get out of there. And so my career is kind of, I guess I've gone where I thought the space was. And my 34 odd years, whatever it is, with Bunnings is in fact not 34 years with Bunnings, it's 34 years with a bunch of businesses that ended up being part of Bunnings. And there's been, when I did the program, I kind of looked back and kind of went, there's been this theme all through this, which is wherever I've gone and whichever role I've sought, it's always been about finding the space so that I can help other people fly. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's interesting. I've known you for a long time, and I don't think I've actually heard the whole story this way.
Yeah.
And what's interesting for me is that, you know, when we look at purpose and we look at a person's purpose, for me, one of the key criteria for a good purpose statement is a curious kid inside of them has to show up.
Yeah.
And I felt like the curious kid inside of you jumped out, the 12-year-old jumped out and said, hey, listen, let me tell you the story. And I just found that's just such a powerful story about the journey. And just the complexity, and you know, it's out of the crucible stories sometimes, our most challenging life stories, that our purpose finds us.
Yeah.
And you know, you put together two things that don't fit, and it sort of all comes together for you and makes sense. So
Yeah.
It's a powerful to see that as you defined it.